I'm Amber Michelle, 34, and I never expected to see my parents again, especially not at the gates of my Malibu mansion. 10 years of silence after they kicked me out for being gay, 10 years of missed holidays and family photos, and suddenly there they were. Security system ping, showing two aging figures I barely recognized, standing awkwardly at my front gate. The empire I built after they discarded me now intimidated them. Should I let in the people who broke my heart? Before I tell you what happened when I opened those gates, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you want more stories about family healing and standing your ground. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Seattle, where appearances mattered more than authenticity. My parents, Catherine and Richard Michelle, had carefully constructed their life according to a traditional blueprint. Dad worked as a bank manager, Mom taught elementary school, and they attended church every Sunday without fail. Our colonial-style house with its neatly trimmed hedges matched every other respectable home on our street. My younger brother Evan was the golden child from day one. He played baseball, earned straight A's, and never questioned our parents' authority. He was 4 years younger than me but somehow always seemed to know exactly what our parents wanted without being told. When he announced he wanted to study business and finance like Dad, my parents beamed with pride for weeks. I was different. Even as a little girl, I asked too many questions, preferred pants to dresses, and was more interested in taking apart our home computer than playing with dolls. Mom would sigh when I came home with dirt-stained clothes and tangled hair. "Amber, why can't you be more ladylike?" became a constant refrain in our household. By 13, I had discovered programming. Our school had recently upgraded its computer lab, and I spent every free period learning to code. I created my first program, a simple game where you had to navigate a maze, and brought it home on a floppy disk, bursting with pride. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, barely glancing at the screen. "But don't you think you should focus more on subjects that will help you in the real world?" Dad was more direct. "Computers are for boys, Amber. You should be thinking about something practical for your future." Despite their dismissal, I couldn't stop. Programming gave me a sense of control I couldn't find anywhere else. In a world of ones and zeros, either the code worked or it didn't. There were no arbitrary rules, no shifting expectations I couldn't meet. Throughout high school, I excelled in math and computer science while maintaining decent grades in everything else to keep my parents from complaining too much. Computer science teacher, Mrs. Rivera, was the first adult who recognized my talent. She entered me in programming competitions where I won several awards and eventually caught the attention of college. When I received a full scholarship to Stanford's computer science program, my parents were conflicted. On one hand, it was prestigious and wouldn't cost them anything. On the other hand, it wasn't the path they had envisioned for their daughter. "Law or medicine would give you a more stable future," Dad insisted during one of our many arguments. "This computer phase will pass, and then what will you do?" Mom was more subtle in her disapproval. "We just want what's best for you, honey. And women in those technical fields have such a hard time. Why make life more difficult for yourself?" Graduation day should have been one of the happiest of my life. Instead, it turned into another battleground. After the ceremony, as families took photos and celebrated, my parents pulled me aside. "We've been thinking," Dad began, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "We'll pay for law school if you reconsider your plans. Stanford has an excellent law program." I remember looking at them in their carefully coordinated outfits, my mother's pearl necklace perfectly centered, my father's tie clip gleaming in the sun, and realizing they would never see me, the real me. "I'm going to study computer science," I said firmly. "This isn't a phase, and I'm not changing my mind." The drive home was silent. When we arrived, I found brochures for law schools spread across my bed. I gathered them up and dropped them in the recycling bin without a word. That night, I heard my parents talking about me, their voices carrying through the heating vent. "She's always been stubborn," Mom said with a sigh. "She'll come around," Dad replied. "Once she sees how hard it is to make it in that field, especially for a girl, she'll appreciate our guidance." But I didn't come around. In the fall, I packed my bags for Stanford, determined to prove them wrong. 4 years at Stanford changed me in ways my parents couldn't begin to understand. I thrived in the competitive, innovative environment. Professors praised my work, and I made friends who valued my intelligence rather than questioning it. For the first time, I felt free to be myself without constant judgment. After graduation, I received multiple job offers from major tech companies. The salary packages were impressive, especially for a new graduate. My parents finally seemed to accept that my computer phase wasn't going away, though they still didn't understand my passion. "At least she'll make good money," I overheard my father tell my uncle at a family dinner. Not exactly a ringing endorsement, but progress nonetheless. Instead of accepting any of those corporate offers, I made a decision that mystified my family. I joined a struggling cybersecurity startup in San Francisco. The pay was less than half what the big companies offered, but the potential was enormous. More importantly, I would have the freedom to create rather than simply maintain existing systems. "You're turning down Google for some company no one's ever heard of." My father couldn't hide his disbelief when I told them. "That's financial suicide, Amber." I moved into a tiny San Francisco apartment with 3 roommates to save money. We shared a single bathroom and a kitchen barely big enough for one person to cook in. My portion of the rent still consumed nearly half my monthly salary, but I was happy. The startup atmosphere was electric. We worked insane hours, but every day brought new challenges and opportunities to innovate. During those early months, my mother called regularly, asking when I'd come to my senses and take one of the corporate jobs that remained open to me. My father was blunter, sending me job listings with salary figures circled in red pen and notes saying things like, "Not too late to make a smart choice." Then came the Christmas that changed everything. I was 24 and had been dating Jessica, another software engineer, for about 6 months. She was brilliant, kind, and made me laugh like no one else could. After years of uncertainty and brief relationships I'd kept hidden from my family, I finally understood who I was and what I wanted. We'd planned to spend Christmas separately with our families, but at the last minute, Jessica's flight to Denver was canceled due to a snowstorm. When she called, disappointed about spending the holiday alone, I made an impulsive decision. "Come to Seattle with me," I said, "meet my family." In retrospect, it was naive to think they would welcome her. I'd never explicitly come out to them, though I suspect my mother had her suspicions. Part of me hoped that seeing me happy with someone I loved would bridge the gap between us. Another part simply refused to hide anymore. We arrived on Christmas Eve. My parents greeted Jessica politely but coolly, showing her to the guest room without acknowledging our relationship. My brother Evan gave me a warning look that I chose to ignore. For the first few hours, we maintained an uneasy peace, engaging in safe topics like the weather and Jessica's work background. Then came Christmas dinner. We sat around the dining table that had been in my mother's family for generations, the one reserved for special occasions. Mom had prepared her traditional feast: roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, her famous glazed carrots. Everything was perfect, as always. The conversation remained superficial until my Aunt Linda, always a bit oblivious to tension, asked Jessica and me how we had met. At a Women in Tech conference, Jessica answered with a smile. "Amber gave an amazing presentation on security protocols, and I just had to talk to her afterward." "We've been dating for 6 months now," I added, reaching for Jessica's hand across the table. The room went silent. My father set down his fork with deliberate care. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Jessica must be your roommate." "No, Dad, Jessica is my girlfriend. We're together." My heart pounded, but I refused to back down or look away. What followed was the worst fight we'd ever had. My father quoted Bible verses about abomination. My mother cried silently, occasionally murmuring about where they had gone wrong. Evan stared at his plate, unwilling to defend me but clearly uncomfortable with my parents' reaction. Jessica tried to leave, not wanting to cause more trouble, but I asked her to stay. This was my family showing their true colors, and I needed her support. "This is not how we raised you," my father finally declared, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly toppled backward. "No daughter of mine will live this lifestyle." "It's not a lifestyle, Dad, it's who I am." "Then you are no longer welcome in this house." His face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You have a choice to make, Amber. Either you end this phase and return to the values we raised you with, or you are no longer part of this family." I looked to my mother, hoping for some support, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Evan still studied his plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "You can't be serious," I said, though I knew he was. "You're giving me an ultimatum: be someone I'm not or lose my family." "Those are the terms," he replied coldly. I stood up, legs shaking but mind clear. "Then I guess I don't have a family anymore." Jessica and I packed our bags while my father watched from the doorway, arms crossed. My mother hovered behind him, occasionally starting to speak but stopping herself. As we headed for the front door, she pressed something into my hand, a small envelope containing several $100s and a note that said only, "I'm sorry." That might have been the end of it, a clean if painful break. But over the next few years, the rejection continued. 2 months later, my cousin Amy got married. The entire extended family received invitations except for me. When I called her, confused, she admitted my parents had told her I wouldn't be comfortable at a traditional wedding. Then came my grandfather's 80th birthday celebration, my niece's christening, Thanksgiving dinners, Christmas gatherings, a decade of family events I learned about only through social media or occasional calls from Evan, who maintained minimal contact but never stood up to our parents on my behalf. "They're from a different generation," he would say, as if that excused everything. "Just give them time." But time only seemed to solidify their position. When Evan got married 3 years after our falling out, my parents threatened to skip the wedding if I was invited. My brother chose to keep the peace, sending me a private message. "I wish things were different. I'll send you pictures." I stopped reaching out after that. The pain of rejection became a dull background ache, something I learned to live with like an old injury that flares up in cold weather. Family became a concept I observed from a distance, something other people had but wasn't meant for me. The months following my family's rejection were the darkest of my life. Jessica and I broke up 6 months later, the strain of my emotional baggage proving too much for our new relationship. I threw myself into work, often sleeping at the office and coding until my vision blurred. The startup became my refuge, the only place where I felt I had value. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was fulfilling my father's prediction, working insane hours for minimal pay at a company most people had never heard of. Some days, doubts crept in. Maybe they had been right about everything. One particularly difficult night, after our main investor pulled out, leaving us weeks away from bankruptcy, I found myself alone in the office, staring at job listings for those corporate positions I'd once rejected. It would be so easy to give in, to take the safe path, maybe even to call my parents and say they'd been right all along. That's when Marcus Johnson, our lead investor, found me. He was an industry veteran who'd taken a chance on our little company when everyone else had passed. Instead of firing me, he pulled up a chair. "Tell me what you're working on," he said simply. Through tears and caffeine-induced rambling, I explained the security algorithm I'd been developing, a new approach to encryption that could revolutionize data protection if I could ever get it to work properly. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, insightful questions that forced me to think differently about the problems I was trying to solve. By morning, we had sketched out a new direction for the entire company, pivoting from our struggling original product to focus on my security protocol. "You have something special here," Marcus told me as the sun rose over the San Francisco skyline. "Don't give up before the miracle happens." His faith in me healed something that my family had broken. Over the next 2 years, we rebuilt the company around my security software. There were still plenty of setbacks, failed demos, technical challenges that seemed insurmountable, competitors trying to duplicate our work, but slowly, we gained traction. The turning point came when a major bank experienced a catastrophic data breach that exposed millions of customers' information. Our solution was the only one that could have prevented it. Suddenly, every financial institution in the world wanted our technology. Within 6 months, we went from barely making payroll to fielding acquisition offers in the hundreds of millions. We didn't sell. Instead, Marcus helped me secure funding to expand, and I became Chief Technology Officer. 2 years later, when our founding CEO decided to retire, I stepped into the role. By 30, I had bought out the original founders and owned the controlling interest in what had become one of the most valuable cybersecurity companies in the world. Success came in waves after that. The company expanded internationally, opening offices in London, Tokyo, and Singapore. I was named to Forbes 30 Under 30, featured on the cover of Business Week, and invited to speak at conferences around the world. The shy, awkward programmer had become a respected industry leader. With financial security came personal changes as well. I purchased my first luxury condo in San Francisco at 29, a far cry from the cramped apartment I'd shared with roommates. At 32, I bought the Malibu property that would become my sanctuary, a modernist mansion overlooking the Pacific, with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space to house the entire extended family that no longer acknowledged my existence. Throughout these years of success, I occasionally attempted to reconnect with my family. I sent Christmas cards that were never acknowledged, birthday gifts that were returned unopened, and even a letter when my company went public, including information about the stock I'd set aside for them. That too was returned, marked addressee unknown, in my father's unmistakable handwriting. Evan was the only tenuous connection I maintained to my former life. He would call a few times a year, always when our parents were away, to give me careful updates about his life and their health. These calls grew less frequent after he had children, dwindling to just Christmas and my birthday. I understood he had chosen his side long ago. To fill the void, I created new family connections. Marcus Johnson became the father figure I no longer had, mentoring me through professional challenges and personal ones as well. I established the Michelle Foundation for LGBTQ+ youth in tech, providing scholarships and mentorship to young people who, like me, might face rejection for simply being themselves. Through the foundation, I met Stephanie, a successful artist who designed our logo as a pro bono project. Where Jessica had been my intellectual match, Stephanie was my emotional one, steady, compassionate, and unafraid of the walls I'd built around myself. 2 years after meeting, she moved into the Malibu house, filling it with her colorful canvases and infectious laugh. "Your family really missed out," she told me one night as we watched the sunset from our deck, "but I'm selfishly glad you became the person they couldn't accept." I had everything I'd ever wanted professionally, and a partner who loved me completely. If there remained an ache where my family should have been, I learned to live with it. Or so I thought, until the morning my security system alerted me to unexpected visitors at my gate. That morning had begun like any other. Stephanie and I had breakfast on the terrace, watching dolphins play in the distance while discussing plans for the Michelle Foundation's annual fundraising gala. We were expecting 40 of the tech industry's biggest names, along with celebrities who supported our cause. The event would raise millions for LGBTQ+ youth, and planning required my full attention. I was in my home office reviewing the guest list when my phone pinged with a security alert. Someone was at the gate. We weren't expecting deliveries or service personnel, and friends knew to call ahead. I pulled up the security camera feed on my tablet and froze. Standing awkwardly by the intercom were two people I barely recognized at first glance. My father, once robust and intimidating, looked small and frail, leaning on a cane I'd never seen before. My mother's carefully dyed blonde hair had given way to a silver gray, her posture slightly stooped. Both wore expressions I couldn't quite read, nervousness, certainly, but something else too. My heart raced so fast I could hear blood rushing in my ears. My palms immediately began to sweat, and I felt a wave of nausea that reminded me of panic attacks I'd experienced in the early days after their rejection. In an instant, I was that heartbroken 24-year-old again, watching my family choose their reputation over their daughter's happiness. "Amber, who is it?" Stephanie appeared in the doorway, concern evident in her voice. She must have noticed my expression. I wordlessly turned the tablet toward her. She understood immediately, wrapping her arms around my shoulders as I continued to stare at the two strangers who had once been the center of my world. "You don't have to see them," she whispered. "You don't owe them anything." She was right, and part of me wanted to ignore the allure, pretend I wasn't home, and continue with our day as planned. They had made their choice 10 years ago. Why should I disrupt the life I'd built to accommodate them now? But another part, the part that still occasionally searched for their names online, that kept a photo album hidden in my desk drawer, that woke up missing them on Christmas mornings, couldn't turn them away without at least hearing what they had to say. "I need to know why they're here," I said finally. Stephanie nodded, understanding as always. "Do you want me to stay with you?" "Please," I replied, squeezing her hand gratefully. We walked to the gate together, the 50-yard journey from the house feeling both too short and impossibly long. With each step, memories flooded back: holiday dinners, graduation day arguments, that final Christmas confrontation alongside questions I couldn't answer. Why now? What could they possibly want after a decade of silence? I stopped several feet from the gate, close enough to speak but maintaining a physical barrier between us. My parents hadn't noticed our approach, too busy taking in the scope of the property with wide eyes. My mother spotted us first, nudging my father and straightening her simple blouse as if preparing for a formal introduction. For a long moment, no one spoke. 10 years of silence hung in the air between us, a gulf wider than the physical distance separating us. "Amber," my mother finally said, her voice both familiar and strange, "you look wonderful." I didn't respond immediately, studying them instead. My father had aged dramatically. The heart attack Evan had mentioned last year had clearly taken its toll. His once commanding presence had diminished, though that familiar stubborn set to his jaw remained. My mother had aged more gently, her face lined but her eyes still sharp and observant. "What are you doing here?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady despite the emotional storm inside me. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "We were in Los Angeles for a medical consultation, we thought, since we were nearby." His voice trailed off as if even he recognized how inadequate this explanation sounded. "Nearby," I repeated flatly. "After 10 years of pretending I don't exist, you decided to drop by because you were nearby." My mother stepped forward, one hand resting on the gate. "Amber, please, could we come in, just to talk for a little while?" I felt Stephanie's reassuring presence beside me, her hand at the small of my back grounding me. With a deep breath, I made my decision and pressed the button to open the gate. "Come in," I said, not waiting to see if they followed before turning back toward the house. But I make no promises about how long this conversation will last. The walk from the gate to the front door seemed to take an eternity. I could hear my father's cane tapping against the stone path, my mother's occasional gasp at some feature of the grounds, the infinity pool overlooking the ocean, the sculpture garden Stephanie had designed, the guest house larger than the home I grew up in. Stephanie squeezed my hand before we reached the door. "I'll make some coffee," she said, giving me a moment alone with my parents. I nodded gratefully, though part of me wanted to cling to her like a lifeline. As we entered the soaring foyer with its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Pacific, I watched my parents' reactions from the corner of my eye. My mother turned in a slow circle, taking in the floating staircase, the modern chandelier, the original paintings that reflected Stephanie's connections in the art world. "Your home is beautiful," she offered tentatively. "So bright and open." "Thank you," I replied automatically, the polite response ingrained from childhood. "The living room is this way." I led them into my favorite room in the house, a comfortable space despite its grandeur, with plush sofas facing both the fireplace and the ocean view. Family homes typically displayed photos tracking the year's graduations, weddings, new babies, but mine held only images from my adult life. Stephanie and me hiking in New Zealand. The executive team at our Tokyo office opening. A candid shot from last year's foundation gala. No evidence of a childhood or the family that had raised me. My father eased himself onto the sofa with a barely concealed wince, setting his cane carefully beside him. My mother perched on the edge of her seat, as if afraid to fully commit to being here. "You've done well for yourself," my father said finally, gesturing vaguely at our surroundings. "Your company, Michelle Security System." "You know the name of my company?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. A faint flush colored his cheeks. "We've followed your career from a distance." Before I could process this revelation, Stephanie returned with a tray of coffee and cookies. She set it on the table between us and took a seat beside me, close enough for support but allowing me space to handle this unexpected reunion. "You must be Stephanie," my mother said with a strained smile. "Evan mentioned that Amber had someone special in her life." Stephanie nodded politely. "Yes, we've been together for 3 years now." Her tone was cordial but cool, protective. "Evan talks to you about me?" I asked, focusing on the more startling part of my mother's statement. My mother looked down at her untouched coffee. "He tries to bridge the gap, keep us updated about your life, though I'm sure there's much he doesn't know or doesn't share." I made a mental note to have a long conversation with my brother about this revelation. All those years of brief, uncomfortable calls, and he'd been reporting back to our parents. "Why are you really here?" I asked bluntly, unable to maintain the pretense of casual conversation any longer. "It's been 10 years. You've missed every milestone in my adult life. You've returned every attempt I made to contact you, so why now?" My parents exchanged a glance laden with unspoken communication, a married couple's shorthand I remembered from childhood. My father nodded slightly, and my mother turned to me with tears gathering in her eyes. "Your father had a heart attack 8 months ago," she said, though this wasn't news to me. "It was serious, They didn't think he would make it through the night. My father stared out at the ocean, his expression unreadable. Makes a man think about his life. Chose is made, bridges burn. We're here to see specialists at Cedars-Sinai, my mother continued. But the real reason, she paused, gathering courage. We miss you, Amber. We've missed so much of your life already. I felt a tangle of emotions too complex to name: anger, hurt, a treacherous flicker of hope. You chose to miss it, I reminded them, my voice harder than I intended. I never wanted to be estranged. You decided I wasn't worthy of being part of the family because of who I love. We were wrong, my father said abruptly, the words seeming to surprise even him. I was wrong, too stubborn and set in my ways to see what I was throwing away. Under different circumstances, these words might have been everything I'd longed to hear. But a decade of pain couldn't be erased by one reluctant admission. What about all the family gatherings I was excluded from? I asked, memories flooding back painfully. Evan's wedding, where you threatened not to attend if I was invited. Holidays, the birth of his children, my niece and nephew who don't even know I exist. That's not entirely true, my mother interjected. They know about their Aunt Amber who lives in California and makes computers safe. We've shown them pictures. This revelation stunned me into momentary silence. Pictures? What pictures? You've never even seen my adult life. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out a carefully folded newspaper clipping, a feature on women in tech from 3 years ago with my photo prominently displayed. The paper was worn at the creases, clearly handled many times. We have a folder, she admitted quietly. Articles, things we find online. Your father even bought your company's security software for his laptop, though he pretends he doesn't know how to use half the features. I glanced at Stephanie, who looked as surprised as I felt. All these years, I'd believed they had completely excised me from their lives, when in reality they'd been collecting fragments of mine from a distance. As the afternoon progressed, we shared an uncomfortable dinner that Stephanie graciously prepared. The conversation lurched between surface pleasantries and painful recollections, occasionally landing on neutral ground like my father's retirement from banking or my mother's volunteer work at their church's food pantry. It was during coffee and dessert that the real reason for their visit finally emerged. Evan's business has been struggling, my father said, studying the rim of his coffee cup. The recession hit his clients hard, and he's had trouble finding new ones. My mother nodded sadly. They've had to put their house on the market, but property values in their neighborhood have plummeted. They'll lose everything they've put into it. I set my cup down with a sharp click against the saucer. And you thought, after 10 years of silence, you'd come ask your successful lesbian daughter for money. The blunt assessment hung in the air between us. My father flinched as if I'd struck him, and my mother's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't like that, she insisted. We didn't come for money. We came because life is too short for these divisions, and we wanted to try to make things right. But since we're here, my father added, unable to help himself, we did hope you might consider helping your brother. For the children's sake, if nothing else. And there it was, the real reason behind this sudden desire for reconciliation. Not love or regret or even my father's brush with mortality, but financial necessity. The successful daughter they'd rejected was now a potential solution to their problem. I felt a surge of anger so intense it momentarily robbed me of speech. Stephanie placed her hand over mine, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone in this moment. I think, I said when I could trust my voice again, that it's time for you to leave. After a moment of stunned silence, my father struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. We've offended you. I can see that wasn't our intention. Wasn't it? The dam holding back 10 years of hurt finally broke. You rejected me when I needed you most. You excluded me from every family event for a decade. You returned my letters, my gifts, even information about stock I set aside for you. Now you show up at my home, admire my wealth, and ask for financial help in the same conversation where you claim to want reconciliation. My voice had risen with each sentence until I was nearly shouting. Stephanie remained beside me, her presence a steady support. That's not fair, my mother protested weakly. We came because we missed you. You missed the idea of me, I corrected her. The daughter you wanted, not the woman I actually am. You've been collecting newspaper clippings of my success while refusing to accept the person behind those accomplishments. My father shook his head stubbornly. We made mistakes, Amber, we're trying to make amends. By asking me for money, I laughed bitterly. That's not making amends, that's opportunism. Richard, my mother said quietly, touching my father's arm. She's right, she turned to me, tears streaming down her face. We've handled everything wrong, from the beginning. We were raised with certain beliefs, but that's no excuse for how we treated our own daughter. Something in her expression, genuine remorse without qualification, made me pause. For the first time, she wasn't defending their actions or asking me to understand their side. She was simply acknowledging the harm they had caused. I should have stood up for you, she continued, her voice growing stronger. When your father gave you that ultimatum, I should have said no. No, we will not reject our child. Instead, I stayed silent, and I've regretted it every day since. My father stared at her in surprise. They had presented a united front my entire life, and this break in the pattern seemed to unsettle him. Catherine, he began, but she shook her head. No, Richard. We need to be honest if we have any hope of salvaging a relationship with our daughter. She turned back to me. Yes, Evan needs financial help. Yes, that was part of why we finally worked up the courage to see you. But it's not the only reason, and it wouldn't matter if you lived in a mansion or a studio apartment. We want to know our daughter again. The raw honesty in her voice reached something in me that defensiveness couldn't touch. I felt tears gathering and didn't try to stop them. Do you know what it did to me? I asked, my voice breaking. Being cut off from my entire family. Having to build a life with this gaping hole where you should have been. Wondering if Evan's children even know I exist. They know, my father said softly. Lily, she's 7 now, she asks about you all the time. Wants to know if Aunt Amber will come to her ballet recital someday. This revelation hit me hard. I had a niece who thought about me, who wanted me at her recitals. A 7-year-old I'd never met who somehow knew I existed despite the family's best efforts to erase me. Stephanie, sensing the shift in the room's emotional temperature, stood up. Why don't I show you some photos of the foundation gala from last year? Amber was honored for her work with LGBTQ youth. Her gracious offer provided a moment for me to collect myself. My mother followed her to the wall of photographs, genuinely interested despite the tension still filling the room. My father remained seated, looking suddenly old and uncertain. Your home security system, he said abruptly. It's one of yours, your company's design. The unexpected change of subject threw me. Yes, why? It's good, very intuitive interface. Better than anything else on the market. He cleared his throat. I've tried most of them for comparison. None measure up to what you've created. It was such a strange, stilted compliment, technical appreciation rather than emotional connection, but it was authentically him. This was my father trying to speak my language, to connect in the only way he knew how. The company is developing a new residential system next year, I found myself saying. More integrated with smart home features. He nodded, something like pride flickering across his face. You always were the smartest one in the room. Even as a little girl. We lapsed into silence again, but it felt different, less hostile, more contemplative. When my mother and Stephanie returned, we somehow found ourselves looking through old photos on my tablet, images I'd salvaged from my childhood and digitized years ago but rarely viewed. Look at Evan's face here, my mother laughed, pointing to a Christmas photo where my brother, missing his front teeth, grinned maniacally at the camera. He was so excited about that bicycle. I remember, I said softly. He rode it until the wheels practically fell off. As the evening wore on, we carefully navigated between moments of genuine connection and painful reminders of all that had been lost. After dinner, as they prepared to leave for their hotel, I made a decision. About Evan's situation, I said, watching their expressions carefully. I'll help, but I have conditions. My father's relief was palpable, though he tried to hide it. What conditions? First, this isn't a loan or a gift to you. It's for my brother and his family, and I'll handle it directly with him. I took a deep breath. Second, I want to meet my niece and nephew. Not once, but regularly. I want to be part of their lives. My mother nodded immediately. Of course, they would love that. And third, I continued, the most difficult part, we need to work on our relationship separately from this financial arrangement. That means therapy, family counseling with a therapist who specializes in LGBTQ issues. If you're serious about reconnecting, you need to understand the damage that was done and take responsibility for it. I expected resistance, particularly from my father. Instead, he surprised me. That's fair, he said quietly. More than fair, given everything. As they left, my mother hugged me tightly, whispering, I'm so sorry, against my hair. My father's embrace was briefer, more awkward, but genuine. Later that night, I called Evan for the first time in months. Our conversation was long overdue, honest in a way we hadn't been since childhood. He apologized for his role in maintaining my exile, explaining but not excusing his choices to keep peace in the family at my expense. I should have stood up for you, he admitted, echoing our mother's earlier words. I was a coward. Yes, you were, I agreed, not sugarcoating the truth. But I understand the position you were in, and I did, even if understanding didn't completely heal the hurt. Lily and Max ask about you all the time, he said, changing the subject. Mom shows them your pictures. Lily says she wants to make computers like Aunt Amber when she grows up. Something warm bloomed in my chest at the thought of this little person I'd never met, inspired by the aunt she knew only through stories and photographs. I'd like to meet them, I said, soon. They would love that, Evan replied, his voice thick with emotion. We all would. After we hung up, I found Stephanie waiting for me on our bedroom balcony, a glass of wine in each hand. She handed one to me without a word, and we stood watching the moonlight shimmer across the ocean. How are you feeling? She asked finally. I considered the question carefully. I don't know yet, overwhelmed, angry still, but also, hopeful maybe. Is that naive? She shook her head. Hope isn't naive. It's brave, especially after everything they put you through. I leaned against her, drawing strength from her steadiness. They might disappoint me again. They might, she agreed, never one for false reassurances. Or this might be the beginning of something healing for all of you. Either way, you have a family. Hear me, your friends, the kids from the foundation. People who love you exactly as you are. In that moment, with the woman I loved beside me and the possibility of reconnection with my family ahead, I understood something important. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about creating space for a different future. 6 months have passed since my parents appeared at my gate that unexpected morning. In that time, we've begun the slow, sometimes painful process of rebuilding a relationship I once thought was irretrievably broken. True to my word, I helped Evan salvage his financial situation, not with a direct handout but by investing in his business and connecting him with my network. More importantly, I've become a real presence in my niece and nephew's lives. Lily, with her gap-toothed smile and precocious questions about coding, has captured my heart completely. Max, at 4, is more reserved but loves when I read him stories over video chat, complete with different doses for each character. Our weekly family dinners remain something of an emotional minefield. Sometimes we navigate the conversation successfully, finding genuine connections and moments of laughter. Other times, an innocent comment will trigger old hurts, sending us back to our respective corners to lick our wounds. The family therapy sessions I insisted on have been both challenging and enlightening. Our therapist, Dr. Martinez, doesn't allow my parents to hide behind generational differences or religious beliefs when discussing their rejection of me. In our third session, my father finally acknowledged the truth I'd suspected all along. His reaction had been driven more by fear of what others would think than by actual moral conviction. I was more concerned with appearances than with your happiness, he admitted, the confession clearly difficult for him. I've spent a decade regretting that choice. My mother has made more consistent progress, joining a PFLAG support group at her church and slowly untangling her religious beliefs from the homophobia she was taught. Last month, she surprised me by attending a fundraiser for the Michelle Foundation, even making a modest donation in her own name. I've had to do my own work too, learning to set boundaries without building walls, to forgive without forgetting the lessons of the past. Dr. Martinez reminds me regularly that reconciliation doesn't mean returning to old patterns, but creating new, healthier ones. The most unexpected joy has been watching Stephanie build her own relationship with my family. My mother, an amateur watercolor painter, bonded with her over art techniques. Even my father has found common ground with her, discovering they share a passion for vintage cars. Not everything is resolved, of course. There are still moments when I catch my father washing Stephanie and me with a flicker of discomfort, or when my mother changes the subject rather than acknowledging our relationship directly. Old habits die hard, and a lifetime of beliefs doesn't transform overnight. But there has been real progress. Last week, after much deliberation, Stephanie and I decided to get married. When I called to share the news, my mother's immediate response was, "We'd be honored to attend." My father, in his own awkward way, asked if they could contribute to the celebration. I've established a trust fund for Lily and Max's education, ensuring they'll never face the financial pressures that might have limited their options. More importantly, I've become the aunt they run to with questions their parents can't answer, with dreams too big for anyone to contain. Through the Michelle Foundation, I've expanded our mentorship program, connecting LGBTQ+ youth who have been rejected by their families with successful adults who have walked similar paths. Watching these young people find their confidence, their voice, and their chosen family has been healing in ways I never anticipated. The mansion that once felt like a symbol of my isolation has become a gathering place for family holidays, foundation events, and weekend visits from my niece and nephew who think having an aunt with a swimming pool and a home theater is the height of coolness. What I've learned through this journey is that success isn't measured by the square footage of your home or the figures in your bank account. True success is having the courage to be authentically yourself, even when it costs you dearly. It's building a life filled with people who love you for exactly who you are, not who they wish you would be. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the hurt or pretending it never happened. It means choosing not to let that hurt determine your future. My parents' rejection shaped me, but I refused to let it define me. That was my victory long before they reappeared at my gate. If you're watching this and struggling with family rejection, know that your worth isn't determined by their acceptance. Build your life, your success, your happiness on your own terms. Create the family you need from the people who cherish the real you. And if reconciliation eventually becomes possible, approach it with clear eyes and strong boundaries. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my parents. We're writing that story one careful conversation at a time. But I do know that whatever happens, I'm standing on solid ground surrounded by love I've earned and success I've built with my own two hands. Has your family ever disappointed you? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more conversations about family, authenticity, and the complex path to forgiveness. Remember, your story isn't over yet, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after the most painful ones. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to be unapologetically yourself, whatever that means for you.